Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's Debbie Potts, the host of the Whole Athlete Podcast, where I have a special guest on the show all the way far from me in Australia, Kirsty Woods. Thanks for coming on to talk about one of my favorite topics, metabolic efficiency.
Hi everyone, not a problem. Looking forward to it.
We just want to hear you talk the whole time, not me. I was telling her I love Australian accents and you just sound fun. Everyone you meet from Australia, especially I'm in Hawaii, there's tons of Aussies there, and they're just always the most fun people to be around and feel their energy and positive vibes. They know how to.
I've got a distinctive phone voice, unfortunately, so I can't disguise that one.
So let's explain why you're on the show today. I was talking a lot about metabolic efficiency testing and how I'm not able to test, but you guys do metabolic testing where you are. So talk a little bit about what your role is and how you're involved with metabolic efficiency testing.
Yeah, so I'll start with obviously how I got involved. And unlike many that I know you have on the show, mine's not so much a personal story, but more of a professional journey to get here. Over in Australia, we have exercise physiology as a degree, which is wonderful. Yet, like many, trying to find a job in the area can be difficult. So as it so happens, I got offered a few jobs in 1 week, and I decided to go with the one I'm currently at. That was 8 years ago, so time does fly when you're really passionate about something. And it was a small company back in the day known as METS, now Metabolic Health Solutions, which is where I was reintroduced to this technology which we use in uni that assesses metabolism. So at uni, one of us was lucky enough to have our metabolism tested. The rest of us needed to sit around and watch the other person be tested with a method called the Douglas bag. And obviously we know it provides key data. So how this business started, not by myself, I'm the practitioner there, but with the directors, was saying, well, let's bring this to the mass. How can we help more people, not just the elite athletes or those in obesity research? So developed this sort of machine, a metabolic cart, to help with the general population, see if it works in a clinic, so designed for practitioners, all the software and everything behind it. So I was delighted to be reintroduced, and essentially it was my role to say, can we make this work in the real world with real people, real patients? And as I said, that was about 8 years ago. We've tested over about 1,500 clients, really looking to help them with their chronic disease. And after that experience, I can definitely say, yes, it can help, and always really learning and looking at other applications. The machine's been used over in the UK and Asia, particularly on athletes. So really looking and exploring what data and how we can help those aspects as well.
So let's kind of describe or review, because we talk about this a lot, but metabolic efficiency and how you're using this for chronic disease, and then we'll get to athletes.
Yeah. So I'll start with metabolic flexibility, which I know you talk a little bit about, and that's essentially the ability for the body to switch between glucose and fat as required. So at rest, which is how I do my testing, the body is designed to burn fat. We should be burning 80% fat. But in the clinic that we see, we only see about 2/3 doing so. So that applies in terms of an athlete, particularly if they're an aerobic athlete. They want to be accessing their fat stores and reserving their glucose and their glycogen in their muscles and liver for the end sprints and those sorts of things which involve those pathways. The efficiency component is the way that oxygen flows into the cells. So particularly for example, in chronic disease, it's an indicator of cellular health. Healthier cells mean oxygen flows more into the cells a lot easier. So that means they're not breathing as much out. So they're more efficient. Like a car, the more efficient we are, the better we run. From an athlete perspective, is that oxygen flow into the cells can be a rate limiting step for energy production. So obviously really important in the applications there, and also impacts things like recovery as well.
That's a great description. I think it's funny because I'm studying nutritional therapy practitioner I've done, but now I'm doing FDN practitioner and looking at chronic diseases and metabolic chaos, how that's impacting so many of our body systems. So you're talking about cell health with people with chronic disease, doing the metabolic testing cart. You're testing mostly, you can see what they're burning, how much fat they're burning at rest. So how does that tell you to create, you're using that data to create a plan for them to become more metabolically efficient to burn fat and reduce their metabolic damage and their cell health? And I'm sure mitochondria are impacted there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the testing, it allows us to, first of all, get their metabolic rate, if it's fast or slow. And it's a common misconception, whether it be particularly weight, that it might be slow, but a lot of the time it's not the case. It is, as you say, is that they don't have that ability to switch back to fat once they've processed their food. So we find they're not burning fat at rest. And so what that means is we want to identify the factors as to why that's the case. So it's a case of getting that baseline, putting an intervention in place, and then reassessing. For the patients we see in the clinic and obviously athletes as well, diet has a huge impact, but it's not to neglect the impact of things like their training, their hormones, their sleep, and a lot of the other things that you talk about. And then the other marker we get is their efficiency. So from the 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, how much they're breathing out. So that efficiency, which we talked about before. It's impacted by similar sorts of things, but essentially we're removing the guesswork and identifying the factors which are impacting it for them by assessing and reassessing. And that can be different for everyone, but there are some common factors there.
So I was emailing with you guys because I would love a metabolic cart, but you can't get it into the US yet.
Well, we thought you were in WA here.
I was in Bellevue. I wish I lived over there. Bellevue, Australia, but I'm in Bellevue, Washington, US. But so it's funny conversation, but I realized this metabolic efficiency testing I did way back in 2005 when we started testing with New Leaf metabolic cart, that what I know now about chronic stress and what I term the holistic method, the impacts of the sleep, your stress, your digestion, all these different things we're talking about, how they impact your metabolic efficiency, I'm sure. So it'd be kind of fascinating to me to go back and start testing people, not necessarily athletes, but just everybody, and see how well they are at burning fat. And then you tweak their lifestyle habits. Let's work on your sleep, because you're looking at the holistic method. You're looking at the whole athlete. So it'd be curious to see if you find, all right, they're not burning fat, but they're eating dinner really close to bed and they're not sleeping well and they're chronically stressed. So do you tie in lifestyle behaviors, as you're saying, there's that black box when you're testing people that
exactly. And that's, as I said, is that black box, or ours is grey with a green front, is it has endless opportunity. So as I said, in the proof of concept clinic I work at, it's mainly focusing on that chronic disease. But there's even aspects of improving that mitochondrial health to do with your efficiency, the powerhouse of the cell, to do with things like anti-aging, and then, as I said, athletes, and all these different possibilities. It's like a blood pressure cuff. It's a tool, and it can be used in so many various ways, some of which we haven't even explored yet, which is really exciting. In terms of what we do in the clinic, as I said, is we want to look at lifestyle based before anything else. So we often get patients who have come from a GP on a range of medications. As you say, it's not only that they're overweight, they've got diabetes, not sleeping, they don't have the energy to play with the kids. So it does tend to be more a multifactorial approach. As I said, initially having a look at diet. For example, those who aren't burning fat or are not very efficient, we know that high insulin levels can create inflammation, make it difficult to burn fat. So looking at lowering those for a reduced carbohydrate load tends to be a first step for a lot of the patients we see. Then obviously, as I said, a lot of them can reduce or come off their medications because they're managing their health better, which is another thing that impacts their fat burning and efficiency. I'm not fully trained in sleep, but obviously recognizing that has a lot of impact on those things. But what we find, as opposed to concentrating on it, when we get their metabolism working as it should, we tend to find that naturally they sleep better as well. Fasting is another thing that we have a look at in the clinic to essentially get rid of the dead, crappy cells and bring in new ones, which can really help with their efficiency as well. Some basic supplementation, for example, if someone's comes in on a statin, as well as they're a bit older, that's going to impact their coenzyme Q10, which has a big role in the way that oxygen can flow into their cells, being an antioxidant, as well as in cardiometabolic health. So having a look at something like coenzyme Q10 supplement for certain individuals can help with that efficiency as well. So it's really, as I said, exploring all avenues based on their case history, which one's most applicable to them. Overtraining is another one, obviously, to consider with the athletes as well, or even those who are trying to lose weight so hard, all they do is slog it out in the gym every day for over an hour doing cardio type training, and it's clearly not working. So even in non-athletes populations, that can sometimes be the issue if they're not addressing their diet right.
Exactly. And that's exactly what my passion and my purpose is now, to go and speak and talk about how you can become fat adapted or burn fat, how you can optimize health at a mitochondrial level and improve performance for daily life and sports by working on, the whole person with all these different elements. But I think, testing is so helpful. So doing lab testing and then measuring your blood sugar, but metabolic efficiency testing, I think, is such an essential, integral part of really working on you as an individual for longevity. But those who are listening, they're athletes. I was asking you those questions because I think most athletes have high risk for chronic disease. So you talk about, insulin resistance, oxidative stress, inflammation, gut dysbiosis. That's not just people that are obese. You can be fit and unhealthy. And that's what I'm trying to get that message out there, that you need to really not just train, like you said, hours a day, hours a week, and think you're really super fit and super powers that you're going to be amazing for the rest of your life. You have to really get this data to know, am I doing something now that's going to ruin my health in the future? Or am I just worried about, getting to Ironman Hawaii or whatever it might be?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. We did some testing at a pharmacy, and the lady who was the fittest, it's not to say she was terrible, but as I said, by looking at her, you'll say, you don't have a problem. So you can't judge a book by its cover. But when we tested her, obviously things, some menopausal type symptoms, she's right in the middle of that, that impacts their efficiency as well. So by looking at her, people say she's really fit. When we measured her efficiency, posed just to ask the questions is what actually is going on, and efficiency was quite poor. So it's that fat fit debate again. We can't assume what's going on. We really need to measure. So, similar with I use the analogy in the clinic, blood pressure. If you went into your GP and he just guessed your blood pressure based on his experience and looking at you, you'd walk out. Yet that's what we're doing when it comes to a lot of these key markers which impact our weight and our health.
So metabolic efficiency, you're saying to test their efficiency, you're referring to their ability to burn fat at rest, like a higher percentage. And
I differentiate the two. So I use the term metabolic flexibility as their ability to burn fat and switch between fuels. Their efficiency is that oxygen number out of the 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, what they're able to breathe out as an indicator of what their cells are using. So, for example, is how how hard it is for oxygen to flow into the cells. And as I said, for athletes, that's a rate limiting step. And there's various aspects which impact that. And not myself, but one of my colleagues had tested someone who didn't mention anything with mitochondrial dysfunction. There is an array of clinically classified mitochondrial dysfunction diseases, and they had their efficiency, say, in the 18s or 19s when it really should be in the 16s or 17s. Or if you're an elite athlete, we had some elite swimmers who were in the 15s.
Wow. So let's get into athletes. So you're saying for athletes and endurance athletes, and I just interviewing someone today about Spartan obstacle course races that are high intensity. Yep. Let's kind of dive more into the athletes, why they should do this, and common things that you see that interfere with their metabolic flexibility and efficiency.
Yeah. So in terms of why they should do it, it's essentially is we should all know our baseline and know our numbers. So if you are on the correct path, even if nothing shows up, that's good because you know that you're doing things right. But for a lot of time is things may be okay but can be improved. So it's those 1%ers in terms of that can impact performance. Or not only that is what we find is some athletes, they don't come to see us for their performance side, but I even had an athlete with fatty liver. Or they come to see us because they can't sleep properly, or their general overall well-being is poor, which obviously impacts their performance. So there is a couple of reasons why I would definitely look to see what's going on. At the elite end, it's about the 1%ers for those weekend warriors, as we say, or those looking just to who run triathlons and things like that at a little bit of less of a level, such as myself. It's about that quality of life. And for me, for essentially after I tore my ACL, I really wanted to know that when I got back, it wasn't going to, my poor efficiency and metabolic flexibility wasn't going to impact my ability to run out again. And that's something I've found since changing some aspects based on the feedback I get from the data in the clinic. And I got the luxury to do that. So I used to go out and have cereal before a game and all those sorts of things. Yeah, it helped. I was younger, but obviously with injuries, I'm getting older. I've been able to, for example, have a couple of coffees or, a couple of eggs and run out a whole game, 245 minutes. And essentially my worst part is the first 15 minutes when I'm warming up, not the end when other people conk out. So it can be a real advantage there.
So let's kind of go through a scenario. If, say, a case client, so use me as an example. So say someone that's, struggling to lose weight, they're running, they're feeling like they get tired running and their heart rate goes up quickly. So if you're doing assume you do treadmill and bike tests with people.
No,
exercise,
this
just
isn't actually, yeah. And the reason I'm actually really glad this came up. The reason we do it at a rest is even athletes, that's how we spend most of our day. And that's why I was asking some of the researchers over in the UK why they're doing it at rest, because their main cohort is athletes. And that was their answer. And it really makes sense because similar to, I suppose, a V8 car is it's got to go over the pits and it's got to do those slow laps first before it goes in. If that's not right, there's no point doing high-end laps, and that's why we do resting. And as I said, in that, particularly in the athlete population, because that's going to have the biggest impact.
Okay, so if you're doing someone at rest, so say you're struggling to lose weight, maybe they're always stressed out. And this is the old me. I'm using my old me as an example.
Old Debbie.
The old Debbie. I would wake up middle of the night, couldn't sleep very well. I gained a lot of weight. So what do you do if someone comes in? How does a test work? And then you create a plan. Let's just kind of give a little example.
Yeah. So we see people obviously initially where we get a thorough case history, and it's looking at all the factors that might impact, obviously, diet, alcohol, sleep, exercise patterns, medications, supplements. And so our first initial appointment goes for about an hour where we have a look at that. We do a baseline test and put in our first intervention. as I said, for majority of my clients, that does tend to be diet because it has the biggest impact. So for a lot of people, as I said, it's about reducing their insulin load and carbohydrate load to essentially see if we can get them burning fat and identify if that's a factor for them. So metabolically, people can switch within 3 to 5 days. So others are longer, but 3 to 5 days. So we get people back in a week to assess that initial sort of aspect. Then from there, we might continue that longer, or as I said, have a look at some supplementation strategies, have a look at their exercise. If they're not doing any exercise, it might be a matter of getting them active. But a lot of them are already at the gym, so it might be a way of switching their training to, as I said, instead of high-intensity cardio, to lower-intensity cardio. And one of the reasons is, particularly if they're not burning fat at rest, they're going to go into that high-intensity exercise not burning fat. So they're going to deplete all their glycogen stores and feel very fatigued and most probably ravenously hungry afterwards. So particularly for the athletes trying to lose weight, that's not helpful either. So that's one way in which, as I said, things can be tweaked, get them back in, reassess if that's had an impact, and fine-tune all those other things as well. So it goes back to the principle of you can't manage what you don't measure. And whether that be in business or in our case, your factors which essentially your metabolism drives your health. Yeah. So let's test those things.
So can you explain how the test works? Because I need to visualize. Like, do you put the oxygen mask, the face mask on, and you measure the RQ, and kind of what things are you looking at the computer, and how long does it take, and time of day, and pre-rec?
So essentially, the key we've got an adapted protocol to essentially, as I said, is in research, people might need to fast for 24 hours, be laying down for 2 hours, and then get assessed. However, in today's, we want to see people weekly. It's not really applicable. So we've adapted a protocol from an American study where we get people to fast for 4 hours and no exercise for 12. So it's essentially they're at a steady resting state when they come in. We use a nose peg and a mouthpiece as opposed to a ventilated hood, which can make people quite claustrophobic, and obviously monitoring for mouth seal leaks and things like that, and really get 5 minutes of good data. So that's where the software side of things I'm really glad about, is because so I can focus on my patients. It automatically eliminates the first 120 seconds where they're getting used to the mouthpiece and things like that, and picks out, for example, if they need to take it out to cough or swallow, pop it back in, automatically eliminates data that's so different to the rest, so we can get a good data set in a small amount of time, which most importantly, not so much acts as a baseline, but we can assess change over time by measuring it similar sorts of days and with the same pre-test protocol.
That's so interesting. So what is the numbers that you're looking at that you're measuring? Or is it like the RQ value, you're looking at the oxygen, the fat, the carbohydrate usage? And I mean, I'm used to exercise testing. I did some resting, but we'd have them sit there for 15, 30 minutes until it got to be steady. And then an exercise test on the treadmill or bike, I would, have it as stages, 3 to 5 minutes, and see where the metabolic crossover point is. So kind of what's the information to get that, what percentage of fat they're burning at rest? You do it for...
Yeah, so obviously we have a look at metabolic rate, which requires the oxygen sensor, which a lot of metabolic carts out there can do that. Then by having the carbon dioxide sensor, the ratio of the oxygen versus the carbohydrate, so going back to some chemistry of it, is when you put in our cell, in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, when you combine food with that oxygen, you give off obviously your heat, your water, and your carbon dioxide, your waste product. So that's the equation. When we burn fat, it's a more efficient fuel. It's as our body's designed. So we use more oxygen and give off less carbon dioxide. So the ratio of the two gases is about 0.7. When we burn carbohydrate, the ratio of the two gases is about above 0.85 to 1. Or if you're storing fat, the process of de novo lipogenesis is the ratio, the carbon dioxide is so high, the ratio can be above 1. So that's really what we're having a look at. And once again is what their RQ score is, or more so their respiratory exchange ratio. RQ score is what happens at a cellular level, which correlates really well with their respiratory exchange ratio at rest.
Yeah, that's why I love doing that testing. I found when I was able to do that with our New Leaf cart that we used to have, it was so fascinating to me. I just love testing people and just seeing what they do. It'd be fun now to see when you can tweak things and kind of biohack somewhat. It's like, how can we get you to burn more fat? And so playing with their nutrition, their macronutrients, I'm sure you can change their nutrition plan. And then do you have them measure their blood sugar or ketones at all? And you said you're fasting?
Yeah. So as I said, with our clinical program, we get baseline pathology as well, providing we're actually having a look at a lot of the data. So please stay tuned with that one in terms of correlations to metabolic results. That's the other side of what we do is obviously using this research to help as many people as we can and ultimately make it all available to practitioners as well, is things like instead of their fasting blood sugar level, having a look at their fasting insulin, because evidence has shown your fasting insulin can increase as an indicator for diabetes down the track, as can a high RQ score, and also weight gain even before blood sugar levels increase. Having a look at obviously C-reactive protein, a general indicator of inflammation, things like fatty liver, all the sort of things that we can see reversed when they get their metabolism right. I don't actually use ketone testing too much. The reason being is we find only about 10% of our patients actually need to go full-blown ketogenic, which is obviously 70 to 80% fat to get their ketones to a level to essentially how it was designed to prevent seizures and those sorts of things. Whether what we find is most people need a degree of carbohydrate reduction. So for athletes, that could still be, 30% as opposed to the 70% they were having before. For the patients we see in the clinic, they generally sit around that 10 to 20% carbohydrate reduction, which might not necessarily mean they're in ketosis, but we're having a look at their fat utilization, and it's enough to get them switching over to fat, getting their weight loss, getting those symptoms under control.
So can you see the mitochondria damage or oxidative stress that people are putting on themselves as athletes with all this testing and the metabolic part?
So that's where we have a look at their mitochondrial efficiency. So there's 21% in oxygen in the atmosphere, and we measure what they breathe out. So as I said, generally about 16 to 17%, which is where we want. It's quite a small range. So small changes can make a big difference. So I've got a bit of a case study here, if you don't mind me sharing.
Yeah, go for it.
I had a patient who actually used to be an ex-triathlete looking to get back into Ironman and things like that. And, but, menopausal, gaining weight. So when we initially looked at her, her efficiencies was in the high 16s. By essentially the main aspect was introducing fasting for herself, reducing those sugars, obviously, and even looking things at making sure she's getting enough salt. I don't want to delve too much in that area, but that's another area of emerging evidence as well. Making sure she's getting her salt is she was able to reduce that efficiency to 5.9. So the lower that number, the better. And as I said, is we see athletes in the 15s. So that's an indicator apart from everything else. So her fat burning went from 70 to 83, her metabolic rate went up. But that's the biggest thing for me that she was on the right track, really improving that efficiency, not only to help with her performance, but her overall health at that age where she's at.
I love that, because that's the whole thing for me. It's focus on performance, but longevity. Let's look at the long run, not just the next
a really
year.
good saying is it's not adding life to your year. It's not adding years to your life. It's adding life to your years. So someone could live to 100, but they can be really crappy. If, however, they're full of energy to play with the kids and the grandkids, they're not taking medications 5 times a day. That's that quality of life. That's that life in their years, which is what we really want to strive for.
Yeah, and I find, I love this topic because it is so bio-individual, and we're so unique, and there's not one size fits all program. And this way you can really dial in, put the pieces of the puzzle together, as I always say, that looking at each person, the metabolic testing and doing the lab work and putting together a plan that's really customized and that you can go back and test periodically. Now, how often do you go back and retest people to see if what you're doing is working?
As I said, metabolically, things can change within 3 to 5 days. So during an intensive phase, weekly.
So your clients come in every week to get retested?
Yeah, and that, as I said, is why it's so fortunate, or I'm lucky enough in the clinic to have, as I said, ECAL, a metabolic cart, which means that it can be done in a half-hour session follow-up with these patients, as opposed to in a clinical setting, which is why many of the researchers, going off at a bit of a tangent, our device ECAL wasn't designed to be in research, but one of the rate-limiting steps in research is they can only test about 10 people because due to the time restraints of or the calibration, how long they need to test for. So a lot of people, unexpectedly, we've found have been using it in their research to, as I said, help elaborate their data set.
Now, how come we can't get this in the US?
Look, I am not sure. As I said, I deal with the practitioner side. That's one you can have a bit of a chat to John about. Over here in Australia and Asia and the UK, it's got TGA approval, which means it's classified as a medical device. I'm assuming it's due to something around that with America and those sorts of things.
Weird. Yeah, I think it's a great tool to add to coaching for practitioners, health practitioners, and people coaching athletes. But also, I don't just coach athletes. I'm finding a lot of people that just come to me that are they can't lose weight. They're trying everything and they just don't feel good. They have chronic fatigue, and a lot of it's just their lifestyle and stress and just tweaking some things that on an individual level, you just have to figure out where the hidden stresses are internally as well as external stressors.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a once again, a case of removing that guesswork, identifying the factors for those guys. And then, as I said, once you've got them, I suppose, fat adapted, burning that fat, it's about fine-tuning with a lot of those other aspects as well.
Yeah. So I know we're just about out of time, but how are you helping athletes, triathletes, and endurance athletes over there in Australia? Do you have clients that are coming in trying to improve their performance with this type of testing?
Yeah. So, as I said, it's not my main cohort, but actually I had as I said, they tend to come in for another reason, but it impacts obviously once they realise the implications in terms of their recovery, their performance, their improved endurance, and then obviously improving their power weight ratio with the weight loss that they're getting. That's when they really become, I suppose, really intrigued with that side of things. So
you can see if they're overtraining and under recovery with the resting test. You see that change.
Yeah. As I said, is their efficiency along with their bloods is, as I said, a few indicators for overtraining, sleep issues, so whether it be sleep apnea or poor sleep and those sorts of things that we often see in athletes, that poor efficiency can sometimes be above the 17s, definitely.
So the RQ value would change too, and if people are not showing they're not burning as much fat on their resting metabolic tests because they're not giving themselves enough recovery repair, or they're increasing their insulin resistance, or just not sleeping. And just stress. They're not recovering from the workout. So I'm sure that must impact. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where patients find it really motivating because they are able to see a change. Up until before it was just, all subjective measures.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, that gives hope to the client because sometimes we have this learned helplessness that it is just the way it is. But if we can show them that things can change, they really leave motivated. In terms of sleep, there was actually a study done on young athletes, I think, and they looked at even one night's sleep deprivation can actually impact their insulin resistance. So that might be one you want to have a look at as well.
Yeah, well, that's what I just was thinking. It's like, gosh, it'd be so fun in a way, not for the person, but just see, all right, well, here you're training, say you're doing math training, you're doing all this low heart rate training, and you are not losing weight, and maybe you're, it's that excessive exercise, but how much is that fine line? What's your tipping point that you're not able to burn fat because you're overtraining, under recovery because of stress, whichever way it's coming from, internal, external, accumulation of, and the sleep factor. And it just, I think
exactly, and that's going to be unique to everyone.
Yeah.
If that HPA for everyone.
Yeah. HPA axis gets dysregulated, then you're increasing, because it's every stress response is a blood sugar response. So if your stress is from excessive exercise, I mean, the whole thing is just so connected, right? So it's this domino effect.
Well, if you don't mind me just mentioning it, it's been really quite interesting because one of the problems I see in athletes, or as I said, those working so hard to lose weight, is that overtraining. They're putting in all this work, but then you've got the likes of exercise physiologist Ben Boccuccio, who has a look at, well, even with the resistant band, a couple of times a week, less than half an hour, but really making it almost to failure, you can get the same metabolic adaptations in terms of the mitochondria, if not better, but without that high workload and some of the consequences that come with that as well. So that's really interesting from that training perspective as well, is trialing something that maybe they're not doing, which can be a reduced workload or a different stimulus, like a slow workout, particularly with resistance-based training, and assess the impacts of that. So that's what we're doing with not only some of the athletes that we see, but some of the exercise compromised people, really getting the quality as opposed to the quantity.
Yeah, definitely quantity. Quality versus quantity is huge. And last thing, I just had another thought. I saw this company called Mitochondria Rescue, and there's a couple of different ones like that. And they were testing heart rate variability at a higher level, like what Russian astronauts did or something. It's interesting. But I just wondered if you put that information, heart rate variability, if you can just put all this together to figure out if you're on the right plan, and gives just more of that data. But
exactly. On the heart rate variability aspect, I know here in Australia, they were using that, I believe in the Wallabies. We've got a heart rate variability machine, which we had to play around with in the clinic as well. So it is really interesting to see, as you said, getting a full picture of what's going on. And as I said, in the clinic, we just don't rely on metabolic data. We look at their weight, their symptomologies, their body composition, their pathology. And as I said, heart rate variability, whether it be in the athletes or the high-functioning CEOs, which is another area I know that technology has been used in, can be really interesting to get, as I said, the whole picture of health.
Training the whole athlete from the inside out.
Yeah, that's the one I was going for.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing of, what I said, the tagline is burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance by training the whole athlete with a holistic method. And that's just what I love this topic for. And what you guys are doing, I just wish I could do it over here in Bellevue, Washington State, US. So I'll have to work on that. But
hopefully in time. But if you're ever in Australia, we can, or even the UK, we can tee you up there.
Yeah, I'm going to London this September. So I have another reason to go there again. I got all these connections there now from podcasting and other coaches. So it'll be fun. Go there for a few days.
That's awesome.
I actually just interviewed Dr. Sarah Myhill. She specializes in mitochondria function over there. Research.
Oh, wow.
So get her to do your testing cart. She'd probably like
absolutely.
So anything else? Did we miss something? Anything else you want to share? And then add any links and where people can learn more? And if you guys have blog and post research articles?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things that I've learned, particularly from the just touching on the athlete side of things. One thing worth mentioning, which is quite funny, is people think that athletes always have this super fast metabolism, but because a lot of them are efficient, it can actually reduce their metabolic rate. So once again, metabolic rate is not the be-all and end-all, so that's really quite interesting. The other misconceptions I see in athletes, or particularly at a low league level, Sunday Warriors, is people chugging down bananas for potassium. But, yeah, avocados have more potassium than a banana. So that's always something I like to tell the athletes. And then the last thing is in terms of the fat-adapted athlete, is once again, we don't need to go crazy on fats, particularly when it's once again about quality. The omega-6 fats is something I see keep on coming up and up again, whether in the clinic or the podcast and the research. So just a couple of things to be wary of. And if you're an athlete and you are suffering with fatigue, metabolic symptoms and things like that, I'm also finding vitamin D, as I said, is a real metabolic supporter, particularly in terms of those who are, as I said, looking to manage their weight to improve their power ratio, because the amount of overweight triathletes is just phenomenal. And as I said, it can be used in that vitamin D has so many different pathways. I don't like to call it a vitamin, I call it a hormone, and can be damaged by a lot of that, as I said, overtraining, recovery, and all the other things that lack of sleep and those sorts of things. So just another one to follow up on, and a little bit of extra information for the athletes out there.
Yeah, it'd be a good blog to do, or podcast too, on just the nutrients that we need for athletes for performance and recovery. Because I think vitamin D, vitamin K, and learning more about that for people, I think is so essential. And then the omega-3s and the excessive vegetable oils that we get. And it's just that right balance of essential fatty acids.
Actually, a quick question. That's something that came up and we've not explored it. But do you guys have much hyperbariatric chambers over where you guys are? Because that's something I'd be really interested to test and retest the impact on efficiency and metabolism as well.
Oh, well, I did get a concussion earlier. Well, that was last November. So last year, and I did look into doing that. So I know we have two where I live. I never used it though, but there's one that looked like it was from 1930s.
And the other one's altitude training. So although I've been really lucky enough to test all these different sorts of things, there are a couple of other things I'd be really interested to have a look at because of the physiology behind them in terms of the mitochondria impact and health they have. So if you do get a chance, it would be I'd be keen to hear your opinion and your own case study guinea pig on those.
Yeah, no, I love doing this stuff, and that's why I can't wait to get a metabolic cart and start doing this resting stuff. There is a company that I met in Ironman Hawaii that I did a podcast with, Pinoe, and they have a backpack, and so you can take it outside. And I've been trying to see, how accurate it is compared to a metabolic cart, because it seems a little odd that it can be that accurate because it's in a backpack. But to be able to do something to test people, I think it's just such essential information you need if you're looking at performance and your optimal health, and like you said, the long run, the quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been keen to look at the data from what you're talking about. I've come across a backpack similar thing, but the key is, I suppose, repeatability. Is you want to be able to, as I said, test and retest. That's obviously the one thing that you want to make sure that you really look into when it comes to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. So where can people get more information? What's your website?
Yeah, metabolichealthsolutions.org is our website. For those who, as I said, just want research updates, we also do some low-carb recipes and the likes. Our Facebook page called MHS Clinics is a good resource there as well. And we also do Facebook Lives every Monday on a different subject, just that might be of interest to either yourself or those following you in the same sort of realm.
Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing this information and help the fat-adapted athlete improve performance and longevity. I think this is a great tool to use, and just that you have all the different, you're putting it all together, the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think that's hard to find. So hopefully you guys can expand outside of Australia and UK.
Particularly without those edge pieces, which I find is what that testing really provides in terms of the puzzle.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on and making time for us today with our time zone changes.
Well, actually worked quite well. Not too late for you, hopefully not a ridiculous hour for me either. Yeah. So we got there in the end, which is wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for sharing that great information. Hopefully our listeners can learn something new and keep up to date with their research, because I think it's something we should be following up with and learning more from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a good evening, and we'll touch base soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.